My name is Lisa. Have you ever been humiliated by your own family in front of everyone? If you have, please comment below where you're from and share your story. I really want to hear from you. It's not easy to talk about, but sometimes these moments teach us the hardest lessons. It was a cold Friday evening when our whole family gathered for dinner. My dad, my two brothers, my sister, and of course my mom. The dining room was packed with relatives, laughter bouncing off the walls, and the smell of home-cooked food filling the air. On the surface, it looked like a normal family dinner, but beneath it, the tension was growing. I could feel it in the tight smiles, the forced small talk, and the way my mom kept glancing at me with that cold stare. I didn't know what was about to happen, but I had a bad feeling deep inside. As the meal went on, the conversation started to get a little sharp. My mom made a few cutting remarks about me, about how I wasn't doing enough with my life, how I was a disappointment compared to my siblings. I tried to ignore it, hoping someone would change the subject, but no one did. Then suddenly, without warning, she stood up, walked over to me, and threw a glass of water right in my face. The cold water shocked me. I sat there stunned, dripping wet, while she looked down at me and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "You're such a pathetic loser. You're nothing to this family." The room went completely silent. I could hear my heart pounding so loud I was sure everyone else could hear it too. Embarrassment flushed my cheeks and confusion filled my mind. How could my own mother say such cruel things in front of all these people? The humiliation was unbearable. Some relatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others tried to pretend nothing happened, but the damage was done. I looked around, searching for support, but everyone just stared awkwardly. No one said a word. I wanted to disappear. My thoughts raced. Why did she do this? What had I done wrong? The pain was deeper than the water on my face. It cut into my very soul. At that moment, I realized things couldn't go on like this anymore. What would you do if your own mother humiliated you like this in front of your whole family? How would you feel? Please comment below and tell me your story. Sharing helps us heal, and I know I'm not alone in this. That night, after everyone left, I sat alone in the quiet house, replaying the scene over and over. I knew something had to change. I couldn't keep living under her harsh words and constant judgment. This moment was the breaking point for me, even if I didn't know it yet. The story didn't end with that glass of water. It was just the beginning of something much bigger, something that would change my life and my family forever. After that terrible night, I kept thinking back to everything that had led up to it. Our family wasn't perfect by any means, but I always believed there was love underneath all the chaos. The truth was, my mom had always been very strict and demanding, especially toward me. Growing up, she expected me to be perfect. Perfect grades, perfect behavior, perfect future. She compared me constantly to my siblings, saying they were better in every way. My older brother was the successful one everyone admired. My sister was the golden child, who never made a mistake, and there I was, always the one who didn't quite measure up in her eyes. Even as I grew older, the criticism didn't stop. She would call me lazy or useless if I didn't immediately meet her impossible standards. No matter how hard I tried, it was never enough. When I got a job, she said it wasn't good enough. When I tried to go back to school, she told me I was wasting time and money. I struggled with my confidence because of her words. It felt like I was constantly walking on eggshells, afraid that any mistake would bring her disappointment crashing down on me. The hardest part was how these words made me feel inside. I began doubting myself, feeling worthless and like a failure. It wasn't just normal mom tough love. It was emotional abuse. Every day felt like a battle to prove myself, not just to her but to everyone else in the family who seemed to believe her harsh opinions. I often found myself asking, am I really that bad? Is there something wrong with me? Adding to all this was the financial tension between us. I was still living at home, and I depended on her for money to pay for my bills, school fees, and even small things like groceries. She held the purse strings tightly, and I felt like I had no control over my own life. Whenever I needed help, she reminded me how much she was doing for me, as if that gave her the right to criticize me even more. I could see the frustration in her eyes whenever I asked for something, like I was just another burden she had to carry. This financial dependence created a pressure cooker situation. I wanted to be independent and prove to her that I could stand on my own 2 feet, but every step I took was met with resistance. She would say things like, "You're not ready yet," or, "Why don't you just be grateful for what you have?" It was frustrating because I felt stuck. I wanted to break free but didn't know how. At the same time, our extended family had expectations too. Being part of a traditional family meant that success and respect were tied to money, status, and appearances. Everyone knew my mom's standards and they whispered behind closed doors about me not living up to them. I often overheard relatives making comments like, "She's so disappointing," or, "Why can't she be more like her siblings?" These words cut deep, especially since I longed to belong and be accepted. The pressure from my mom and the family wasn't just about me. It was about how they wanted to see our family from the outside. I was supposed to be a shining example, but I wasn't. That weight of expectation made me anxious all the time. I felt like I was failing not just myself but my whole family. It was exhausting and the pain grew inside me every day. As time went on, the anger inside me built up like a storm. I tried to hide it, pretending I was okay, but every criticism was like fuel to the fire. The more she put me down, the more I wanted to scream back or run away from everything. I felt trapped in a cycle of disappointment and guilt. My heart broke a little more each time she called me names or made me feel small. The night she threw water in my face didn't just come out of nowhere. It was the result of years of tension, hurt feelings, and broken trust. We had argued earlier that day about money and my future, and I could see the coldness in her eyes growing. I think deep down she wanted to control me, but I was starting to fight back in my own quiet way. I was tired of being the family punching bag, tired of being called a loser by the person who was supposed to love me the most. That night, everything exploded. The water was more than just water. It was the symbol of everything I had been holding inside. Humiliation, anger, pain, and the desperate need to break free. I realized then that I could no longer live under her control, no matter how hard it was to face the consequences. Looking back, I see that moment as a turning point. It showed me how far I had let myself suffer for the sake of family approval and financial dependence. It was the moment I finally understood that my worth wasn't defined by anyone else's opinion, not even my mother's. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but I knew I had to take control of my life and my future no matter what it cost. That night, the family dinner started like any other, but there was an uneasy feeling hanging in the air. Everyone was seated around the big wooden table in our dining room, the warm glow from the chandelier above barely masking the tension. My dad tried to keep things light by telling jokes, but even his voice sounded forced. My brothers and sister exchanged quiet glances, sensing the storm that was about to come. My mom sat at the head of the table, her eyes fixed on me, sharp and cold. The conversation quickly turned to my life, or rather what my mom thought was wrong with it. She began with a smirk. "Lisa, maybe if you worked harder you wouldn't be stuck living here at our age." Her voice was loud enough so everyone could hear, and the relatives nearby shifted uncomfortably. I swallowed the lump in my throat, trying to stay calm. I opened my mouth to defend myself, but before I could say anything she went on. "You think just because you have a job and try to help a little, you're successful? Pathetic." The words stung deeply, but I tried to brush them off. I was used to her insults, but something about tonight felt different. More cruel, more public. I glanced around, hoping for support, but no one said a word. The silence in the room was deafening. Suddenly she stood up, her face twisting into a cruel smirk. "You're a joke, Lisa. You don't deserve this family." Then without warning she grabbed a glass of water and threw it right into my face. The cold liquid shocked me so much that I gasped and froze for a moment, droplets running down my cheeks and soaking my clothes. The room went silent. You could hear a pin drop. My dad's jaw tightened. My siblings stared, eyes wide with shock. The relatives around us shifted awkwardly, unsure what to say or do. I sat there, stunned and wet, my heart pounding faster than ever. The humiliation was overwhelming. I felt as if all the eyes in the room were burning into me, judging me like I was some kind of failure. My mom, on the other hand, laughed, a low, mocking laugh that made my skin crawl. "That's what you get for acting like you're better than us," she said with venom. Inside me, a storm of emotions raged. I felt humiliated, crushed by the public shame, but underneath it all, anger began to burn. I was angry at her for treating me like dirt in front of my family. Angry at myself for letting this happen. Angry at everyone who stayed silent while I was being torn down. The humiliation mixed with rage and pain, and it was hard to breathe. Someone finally tried to break the silence. My sister spoke softly, "Mom, please, let's not do this here." But my mom only smirked, enjoying the power she had. She seemed to feed off the attention, the control. That moment felt like a line crossed, a point of no return. As the water dripped off me, I quietly made a decision that would change everything. I knew I couldn't go on like this, being dependent on her money while she treated me like a failure. That night, I decided to cut off all financial help from her. It was a terrifying thought because I knew it meant walking into uncertainty, but it was the only way I could start taking control of my life. After the dinner, the house was cold and empty. I sat alone, shivering from the water and shaking from the shock of what had happened. Doubts filled my mind. Was I making a mistake? Could I really survive without her help? What if I ended up worse off, alone and struggling? But the pain of staying under her thumb was even worse. I thought about all the times I had begged for approval and never got it. I remembered every harsh word, every disappointed look. I realized I didn't want to live in fear of her anymore. I wanted to find my own path even if it was hard. That night was the breaking point. The moment when I stopped being the quiet victim and started planning how to fight back. It wasn't just about money. It was about respect and dignity. I promised myself that I would never let anyone, especially my own mother, make me feel worthless again. This was the start of a difficult journey, but I was ready to face it head-on, no matter what came next. After that night, I knew I had to take control of my life in a way I never had before. It wasn't easy, but I quietly started making changes to cut off the financial support my mom had always given me. It felt like stepping into unknown territory, but I was determined. I began by closing the joint accounts where she had access to my money. I transferred everything into a new account under my name alone. I stopped asking her for money no matter how tempting it was when bills piled up. It was hard to say no, especially when I felt vulnerable, but I kept reminding myself that this was about my future. Setting boundaries was the hardest part. For years, my mom had controlled every penny I earned or received from her. Now suddenly I was telling her no without feeling guilty. At first she was confused. She called me several times, asking why I hadn't asked for money or permission like before. I stayed firm, calmly explaining that I needed to stand on my own feet. The fear of her reaction was real. I worried she might cut me off completely, kick me out of the house, or even try to hurt me emotionally worse than before. But deep inside, I knew I couldn't live under her thumb any longer. The days following this decision felt tense. Family dinners became awkward. My mom's usual sharp remarks turned into angry glares and cold silences. The moment she found out I had taken control of my finances, she exploded. "How dare you do this behind my back?" she shouted one afternoon, her face red with rage. "After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me?" She tried to guilt-trip me, reminding me of all the times she had helped me and saying I was ungrateful. "You're nothing without me," she hissed. But I didn't back down. I looked her straight in the eye and said, "Maybe I'm nothing to you, but I'm not nothing to myself. I'm done being your puppet." Her anger only grew, and she went to other family members, trying to turn them against me. "She's gone mad," she told my siblings. "She's trying to ruin the family." But surprisingly, some of them didn't jump to her defense like I expected. They could see how hard I was trying to change and respected me quietly for it. The whole situation brought out a lot of raw emotions. There were days when I felt alone and overwhelmed, doubting if I could really do this. But slowly I began feeling something new: empowerment. For the first time in my life, I was making decisions for myself without fear of approval or rejection. Every time I paid a bill with my own money or handled an expense without her interference, I felt a small victory. There were moments when my mom tried other tactics to regain control. She would send pitying texts, saying she was heartbroken and missed her little girl. She'd show up at my door unannounced, pretending everything was fine, hoping I'd give in. But I stood firm. I realized that her attempts to manipulate me only showed how scared she was of losing control. Family gatherings became battlegrounds. At one dinner, she loudly accused me of being selfish and disrespectful. I stayed silent at first, letting her words wash over me. Then I calmly said, "Respect is earned, not demanded. I'm here to build a better life, not to live under your rules." Some relatives nodded quietly, others looked shocked. It was clear this new me was not the same person they had known before. Even though the fight was painful, I started noticing changes in myself. The fear that had gripped me for years began to loosen its hold. I was no longer shrinking away from conflict or hiding my feelings. I spoke up more, took control of my schedule and finances, and made plans for my future without asking permission. This journey wasn't without setbacks. There were moments when I wished things could go back to how they were, when my mom's support felt like a safety net, even if it came with strings attached. But I knew those strings were suffocating me. The pain of cutting ties even partially was hard to bear. Yet with each passing day the feeling of empowerment grew stronger. By cutting off financial dependence, I wasn't just taking control of my money, I was taking control of my life. It was a painful but necessary step toward freedom, self-respect, and healing. I knew the road ahead would still be difficult, but for the first time I felt ready to walk it on my own terms. What happened next I honestly never saw coming. A week after I cut her off financially, I got a call from my aunt, my mom's older sister. She sounded nervous, almost embarrassed. She said, "I think we need to talk about your mother." I wasn't sure what to expect, but when I met her at a small cafe the next day, she didn't waste time getting to the point. She told me my mom had been borrowing money from several family members for years, claiming it was for me. She said my mom would show them fake medical bills, photos of my empty fridge, and even printouts of fake eviction notices, all so she could get money. I was stunned. Wait, she told people I was sick? That I was broke. I couldn't believe it. While she was mocking me at home, throwing water in my face and calling me a loser, she was painting a completely different picture outside. My aunt looked at me with sad eyes. "She manipulated all of us," she said softly. "We thought we were helping you." That conversation opened a floodgate. Within days, 2 of my cousins reached out saying they had similar experiences. One of them even lent her a few $1,000s last year. "She said you needed help getting back on your feet after losing your job," he said. I had never lost my job. She had lied, again. What shocked me the most was how everyone had believed her without even talking to me. And that's when something shifted. I realized that for years, my mom had controlled the family narrative. She was the strong, giving mother who sacrificed everything. I was the weak, helpless daughter who couldn't function without her. And now that I had stood up for myself, the story was unraveling. Some family members who used to ignore me at gatherings now looked at me differently. My uncle, who barely spoke more than a few words to me in the past, called one evening and said, "I admire what you're doing. It takes guts." That simple sentence meant the world to me. My younger sister, who had always been close to our mom and followed her blindly, started noticing things too. She came over one day and said, "You know, I used to think you were being ungrateful. But now I see how she talks to you, how she twists everything." We sat in silence for a moment. Then she added, "I think I was scared of her too." The truth had started to spread, not because I went around telling everyone, but because people began seeing for themselves. My mom's reactions grew more intense. She threw tantrums at family functions, tried to play the victim, cried loudly in front of guests about how I had abandoned her. But the more she tried to control the story, the more cracks appeared. Eventually, my aunt organized a quiet get-together at her house and invited only close family. I hesitated before going, unsure if it would be another ambush. But when I walked in, I saw familiar faces looking at me with softness, not judgment. My aunt stood up and said, "It's time we stop pretending everything's fine. We owe the narrator's name an apology." I couldn't hold back the tears. I didn't need a dramatic confrontation. I needed acknowledgement. And that night I got it. People started sharing their own experiences with my mom. She had always been critical, controlling, sometimes even cruel, but no one had dared speak up. Till now. The hardest part was still ahead, facing my mom again. A few days later, she showed up at my apartment without warning. I opened the door and stood in silence as she looked me up and down, then said coldly, "So this is what freedom looks like." I didn't reply. I just let her talk. She went on about how I had embarrassed her, how everyone was turning against her because of me. She said, "You've destroyed this family." And I finally said, "No. You did that when you used your love as a weapon." She didn't have a response. For the first time she looked small. Not weak, just like someone who had run out of power. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. He just stood there silent. Then she turned and walked away. That moment didn't bring joy. It brought clarity. I didn't need revenge. I needed peace. And I had finally taken the first real step toward it. Since then, the family dynamics have changed. Some relatives have distanced themselves from my mom. Others are cautiously trying to rebuild a healthier connection with me. I'm not in a rush to forgive her, but I've made peace with setting boundaries. I no longer feel guilty for choosing myself. And maybe one day, if she truly sees what she's done and tries to make it right, I'll be open to a conversation. But for now, I've learned the power of standing alone, and it feels like freedom. If there's one thing I've learned from this whole experience, it's that sometimes, the people who are supposed to protect you the most can be the ones who hurt you the deepest. And that pain cuts differently. It's not just sadness, it's confusion, guilt, shame, and a deep aching loneliness. But what I also discovered is that standing up for yourself, even when it feels like the whole world is against you, is one of the most powerful things you can ever do. For a long time, I thought being a good daughter meant staying quiet, being polite, and enduring the emotional punches just to keep the peace. But peace built on silence is not peace, it's fear. And I was done living in fear. I was done shrinking myself just to make others comfortable. It wasn't easy. In fact, it was one of the hardest things I've ever done. But it gave me my voice back. It gave me a life that finally feels like my own. To anyone out there watching who has faced something similar, maybe your family dismisses your pain, mocks your dreams, or makes you feel like you're not enough, I want you to know you are enough. You've always been. And you have every right to protect your peace even if it means disappointing others. That's not selfish. That's survival. You don't owe anyone your mental health. You don't owe anyone your silence. And you certainly don't owe anyone access to your life just because they share your blood. I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever felt betrayed or humiliated by someone in your family? How did you deal with it? Drop your story in the comments below and let me know where you're watching from. Whether you're in Texas, New York, Florida, or even across the world in Nigeria or South Africa, your story matters. And you never know who needs to hear it. Also, if this story touched your heart or reminded you of something you've been through, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. I share more real-life stories just like this. Stories of pain, growth, and healing that remind us we're not alone. Because at the end of the day, we all want the same thing. To feel seen, heard, and loved, even if we have to walk away from the ones who should have given us that in the first place. This is my story. And maybe now it's your turn to share yours.